Good evening, everyone. I'm Linda Weber, the Legislative Vice President of National Organization for Women of New Jersey. And I want to welcome you to the first webinar of our 2020 state conference, which, of course, like all conferences these days, is virtual. Really gave us a great opportunity, though, to present to all of you a number of different webinars before our larger event on October 3rd. And today's webinar is Why the ERA and Why Now? New Jersey Now is also celebrating its 45-year anniversary this year. So we're very excited to bring you a webinar for each pillar of the National Organization for Women elements. And this first one is Why the ERA and Why Now? We have an amazing panel for you tonight to discuss the ERA and why it remains so important today. It really is only 23 words, but probably 23 of the most important words in our history. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. But why are we still talking about the ERA, you know, so many years after it seemingly was dead on arrival, if you will? 38 states were needed to pass the ERA. 35 passed it pretty quickly after the first 5 years or so, and then it kind of got stuck. But the ERA isn't dead. We've had 3 more states now ratify it, including the 38th being Virginia earlier this year. But there was an article in Refinery 29 last year that said the ERA is a legal phoenix. It is the Maya Angelou of the law. You can block it in committee. You can bury it in Congress. You can set an arbitrary deadline, throw in a fear-mongering female conservative icon and Ronald Reagan, and still from the ashes it will rise. So what we have for you tonight are two icons of the women's rights movement who are both very involved in the ERA. We have Alice Cohan, who's with Feminist Majority and was leader of the 2004 March for Women's Lives, bringing over 1 million marchers to DC. I'm sure some of you that were there in 2017 can appreciate what it took to do an event like that. And we have Jan Erickson, who's the director only 2 weeks after Congress did in 1972. And finally, we have an up and coming woman who I'm sure will be an icon someday. Lexi Abrams is the New Jersey lead for Generation Ratify, a Gen Z organization pushing for the ERA. And she's also a hardworking high school student. So welcome, Alice, Jan, and Lexi. I'm going to have each of these women introduce themselves and speak to what they know about the ERA, how they've been involved with it, and why it's still important today. So Alice, I'd love to turn it over to you first.
Well, thank you so much. And it's great to be here. Great to be home, really. I'm a proud daughter of New Jersey. And as a matter of fact, I joined now in New Jersey in 1983. So, no, 1973. What am I saying? No, maybe it was in 83. I'm so bad at dates, but it was a long time ago. And I have to say that I've been incredibly lucky because I've been able to spend my passion as my life work. And there's very few people that get to do that. But I worked for National Now for over 20 years. And now I've been at the Feminist Majority for over 20 years. And that's pretty amazing. And I've seen the country, that's for sure. Especially during the last campaign for the Equal Rights Amendment. I was the field director and I traveled all over the country to organizing. As a matter of fact, I was going to write a book. I had the title all set. It was going to be called Eating My Way Through Unratified America. It was a guide to for how to find a restaurant in a strange town. And so we had some wonderful stories. Probably my most favorite was the truck stop in Sallisaw, Oklahoma, where they let us organize out of the truck stop because there was a phone there. This was before cell phones. We were always searching for public phones. And we had all our meals there. But anyway, I've really seen the country. I've stayed with activists all over this country, sometimes in hotels, but usually with people's homes, which was the best because I really got to know people. And I guess I am best known for the rallies and marches that I've organized, the largest one being the 2004 March for Women's Lives. But I've also organized all the ERA rallies and marches that we've had here and around the country. One day we had 5 rallies going on in unratified states on the same day. That was a memory. Anyway, but you know who else is a proud daughter of New Jersey? Alice Paul. Alice Paul spent her final years in New Jersey. And as a matter of fact, now New Jersey had a major part in helping to bring her to highlight her role in getting the right to vote and as the author of the Equal Rights Amendment. We celebrated her 92nd birthday and we had a party and we invited the press to come to cover who was Alice Paul, because they didn't even know. And then one year we had the Now New Jersey conference was near the nursing home where she was. And so we had a march and rally to the nursing home. And the nursing home people were so terrific. They brought Alice out in a wheelchair, and we had a little rally for her. And so now New Jersey took a major role in helping people all over the country and the world know who Alice Paul was, and that the Equal Rights Amendment wasn't some newfangled thing, but she wrote it right after women got the right to vote 100 years ago. So we can all be proud. I bet some of you remember some of the things we did in New Jersey, like the Freedom Train we took from New Jersey all the way to Illinois and picked up people along the way and had torchlight vigils at every stop. But that's enough about the history. Let's talk about current. Right now, as Linda said, 38 states have ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. The House of Representatives has extended the time limit, so recognized the ratification, but the Senate hasn't. And the Senate won't, given the composition that it has right now. So we must flip the Senate from red to blue so that we have the chance to extend the time limit in the Senate and certify the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. That's one route. The other route is the courts. And Jan, right after me, is going to talk about the route in the courts. So you'll get the idea of that we have two avenues or two-way vehicles to move towards ratification. We can only win in Congress if we change the combination of who's sitting in those seats. And so now, and the feminist majority has gone together to jointly sponsor a campaign to flip the Senate. And it's called votefореquality.us. The 4 is written out. Votefореquality.us. You can go to the website and get more information. But essentially, we want to extend the time limit so that the Senate can certify the Equal Rights Amendment and we can finally have it as a law of the land. We're targeting 7 Senate campaigns in Arizona, Kelly, in Montana, Bullock, in Iowa, Greenfield, in Kansas, Boyer, in North Carolina, Cunningham, in Maine, Gideon, and South Carolina, Harrison. We also are doing Get Out the Vote C3 work in 5 states. The closest to us in New Jersey is Pennsylvania, which is critical for the outcome of the presidential race. In addition to Pennsylvania, we're working in Wisconsin, Michigan, and then Louisiana and Colorado have abortion referendums on the ballot. So we're working in those states because they're anti-abortion referendums. Mm-hmm. The one in Colorado is trying to knock out the work of Warren Hearn, who was one of the few doctors left who in this country does late-term abortions. He's an incredible man. And in Louisiana, the abortion referendum would make it so you couldn't get an abortion in the state of Louisiana. So we really have our work set out for us. What we've done is, do you know that on the average, in a presidential year, only 40% of students vote. So we are determined to up that percentage. We did a similar model in Virginia and increase the turnout of students from 17% to 37%. And it really made a difference in tight races. So that's why we're doing this campaign. Are you ready for this? We have now hired over 100 students to work on this campaign in the various targeted states. I think that's just amazing. And of course, all this has been done virtual because the students are either not on campus at all, or mostly their classes are virtual. So this whole campaign is a virtual campaign using social media for organizing. And again, it's called votesforequality.us. I just got off the Zoom call with our state organizers. In most states, we have state organized, state coordinators. And then in the targeted campuses, we have campus organizers. And so the states function together. And we just had a webinar training on using social media. I'm learning a lot. Only shows me how much I don't know. But at any rate, it's very exciting. And I think I'll stop that, listen to what the rest of my colleagues have to say, and then we'll take questions afterwards.
Sounds perfect.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much, Alice. I love how you've been in this for a long time, and I'm sure you've seen how the technology that we use for various things has changed over the decades, and you probably never thought we'd be as virtual as we are during this pandemic for this election.
Oh my gosh.
Remembering the days of the phone trees.
That's right.
There you go. There you go. So now I'd like to pass the baton to Jen Erickson, who's the Director of Government Relations for now. And as I mentioned before, was a key catalyst for Alaska passing the ERA so shortly after Congress did in '72. And she's going to share with us why a couple of different ways that we can get the ERA finally in effect, but also why it's still so important that we push for it. Jan?
Right. Thanks so much. I'm going to see if I can master this technology and pull up my notes. So hang on, everybody. Here we are. Well, as Linda mentioned, and by the way, thank you, Linda. I've never been called an icon before. Boy, that's fantastic. I have worked in government and a lot of election campaigns, and have been working on many, many issues over my lifetime. I came out of working for newspapers, radio, and TV, and then got into doing campaign work on U.S. Senate and U.S. House successful elections. So I got inspired by that. But I've been at the Now Action Center in D.C. since 1996. And I was also state president of Now back in the mid-'80s. And I'm government relations director, which means I work with both policy and legislation, but I also get my hands in doing communications and advocacy work as we write action alerts and we let people know what's going on in DC. And of course, it's right now pretty scary. So anyway, there is good news. I really am so encouraged that things seem to be going very, very well. Let me just back up 1 second. Linda mentioned that we got the ERA passed very quickly back in '72. I happened to be in the right place at the right time. Boy, you can't value that. It's just really fantastic that I was working in the state Senate. I mentioned to my boss, Senator Josephson, that Congress had finally passed the ERA and sent it out to the states to ratify. He was a great progressive liberal. We introduced a bill. It sailed through both the House and the Senate. There was also a measure that put it on the ballot for a state ERA, and that was approved at the next general election. At that time, we thought the ERA would just sail through 37 other states and it would be done. We wouldn't have to do any more work, right? Not. So here we are in 2020. when the activists in Virginia flipped the state legislature to Democratic control, which was absolutely necessary after so many years of trying to get it through the Virginia legislature. So in January of this year, the Virginia legislature swiftly approved ERA ratification. And before that, of course, in the last couple of years, Nevada and Illinois had passed ratification measures. So we've got our 38 states. Amazing. This was the three-state strategy that you folks might have heard us talking about for many years and wondering, is that going to work? So the question asked by the title is, why ERA and why now? Well, why ERA advocates, why did they proceed with these very belated ratification measures? The theory was that we might prevail because the deadline for expiration, the expiration deadline in 1982 appears in the preamble or the proposing clause of the ERA resolution, not in the actual language of the ERA itself. And so the lawyers looking at that thought, maybe we have a chance. Let's put in a bill to remove that deadline. So Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, I think back in 2010, not sure about that, but somewhere around then, introduced a bill to remove the deadline. And then the House sponsor was and is a Representative Jackie Spear from California. Now the House, as mentioned, did pass the deadline removal bill in February, 232 to 183. That was all the Democrats and 5 Republicans. So there are 183 Republicans who did not vote for it. That tells you a lot about where Republicans stand on women's equal rights, doesn't it? So to get to the point, there's no clear guarantee of equal protection in the US Constitution that recognizes the persistent discrimination that women have endured for centuries. The 14th Amendment of the Constitution, ratified in 1868, granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, including former slaves. It was a necessary outcome of the Civil War. Guaranteed all citizens equal protection of the laws. It wasn't, I don't think they had women in mind. But at any rate, over the years, there have been a number of efforts that have gone to that equal protection clause and sought to apply it in cases of discrimination against women. Unfortunately, the record is that more often than not, we lost when we were trying to use the equal protection clause to protect women's equal rights. So that's one very good reason why we need to talk about having a very clear equal protection for women in the Constitution. The question is asked, why now? And as I have been laying out here, we absolutely have to have this protection. There is not a single other major democracy in the world with a written constitution that lacks a sex equality provision, as does the US Constitution. So we really are behind the curve. We're supposed to be leading the world in human rights and women's rights, and we're actually lagging. It's just really sad. So what will the ERA do for women when it's ratified? Ratifying the ERA would make sex equality a constitutional right for the very first time in US history and guarantee the rights affirmed by the US Constitution are held equally by all people, regardless of sex. The ERA would create a permanent, uniform, and national standard for eliminating sex discrimination by government at all levels and provide a fundamental legal remedy against sex discrimination for all people. Under the ERA, sex, and this is very, very important, sex would be considered a suspect classification and would become a protected category. Those are very essential words. This would clarify how our legal system handles sex discrimination and institute the standard of strict judicial scrutiny for such cases, raising the level of judicial review to that for racial or religious discrimination cases. This would help ensure equality in pay. Doesn't that sound great? Job opportunities and education for women and girls, and help to address sexual assault and harassment at the national and local levels. Without the ERA, let's get my computer up here, the progress we've made toward women's equality can be lost at any time. And as you know, we've had a lot of reversals. In fact, some of the measures that have been adopted by the Republican-controlled Congress before the Democrats took back the House and under President Trump's leadership have really reversed many of the gains that we've made, particularly wiping out a lot of the gains that were made under President Obama. So we're going to have a lot of things to try to correct when we take back the White House and the Senate. But at any rate, going on, the ERA would safeguard the gender protections included in such watershed legislation as the Equal Pay Act, which is still on the books, although it is, limited. We really need a more expanded Equal Pay Act. And the Title 7 of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and Title 9 of the Education Amendments Act. And I might add, some of you may have heard about this, that the Trump administration and Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos have really decimated the Title IX protections against sexual harassment. So that is going to be a very big project for us to try to correct when we get back in power. What will the ERA do to address societal discrimination against women that isn't necessarily covered by the law? That question comes up a lot. There are a few issues that women face today that would not be addressed by ratifying the ERA. It would be a basis of equality that would be generally recognized across all policy areas. Issues from employment discrimination to sexual harassment and equal pay, all of these issues are at their core about equality. As long as gender equality is not the law of the land, inequality will be allowed to persist, manifesting itself as violence, oppression, cruelty, and abuse that women face every day. This is especially relevant for marginalized and vulnerable populations such as immigrant women, women working in low-wage jobs, women of color, women with disabilities, and the LGBTQIA+ communities. As we know, discrimination and misogyny that women face extends to all aspects of their lives, including areas that the law does not necessarily address. However, our society can benefit from standing up and declaring that people of all genders are equal. We've seen throughout history that legal change and societal change develop together and reinforce and propel each other on. Enshrining gender equality or sex equality in our Constitution will not occur in a vacuum. The ripple effects will be felt throughout society. There are a lot of other advantages we can talk about, but I'm going to move on to state ERAs. I mentioned that Alaska adopted a state ERA the same year we ratified the ERA. There are 26 states right now that have their own equal rights amendments in their state constitutions. We don't really know how well they're being utilized, at least over the last 15 years. Prior to that, Professor Linda Wharton of Rutgers School of Law did a study and found that the state ERAs were not being utilized very much to advance women's equal rights. We did get a hold of Linda just yesterday. I called on the help of Bobby Francis. I'm sure many of you there in New Jersey know Bobby of www.equalrightsamendment.org and Alice Paul Institute. And Professor Wharton wrote back and said she did know that state ERA claims continue to be asserted over the past 15 years. And for example, there was a challenge to the state cutoff of Medicaid funding for abortion that has been brought under Pennsylvania's ERA. So I suggested to her that this would be a great project for graduate students to take on, looking at what's happened since her study in 2005, because it's so important that we use those state ERAs, in addition to, of course, having the federal ERA. I think I'm going to move on down to the lawsuit that is pending, which is the good news part. It was brought, as mentioned, by the Attorneys General of Virginia, Nevada, and Illinois in January, just after Virginia voted to ratify. And by the way, we are also being assisted, that is the ERA coalition that we work with, by a pro bono law firm of Winston and Strawn, with the excellent expertise of Linda Coberly, who is a partner with Winston and Strawn, and she's been with us all the way, and they're doing an absolutely fantastic job. But the attorneys general of those three states brought this lawsuit, And if folks are interested, I can send to Angeline, she can share some of the links to the legal documents that have been filed in this case. The case is in the best court. It's in the Federal District of the District, by the way, of Columbia. Basically, the suit demands that the Archivist of the United States, that's a great job title, isn't it? David Ferrerio, I'm mispronouncing his name, Ferriero, there we go, immediately certify the Equal Rights Amendment as part of the Constitution. You might have read that after Virginia ratified, the Trump administration sent a memo, the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel issued a memo and a statement saying that because the deadline had expired many years ago, the Equal Rights Amendment was no longer pending, and we need to go back and start all over again. And so the archivist, Mr. Ferrerio, did not move to certify the ERA as a result. And so this is what the lawsuit demands that he do. Some of the complicating factors are rescissions. You know, about 5 states, when Phyllis Schlafly sicked her minions on a lot of these conservative legislatures, after they had originally voted to ratify, and they rescinded their earlier vote. And that is a question. It's never been taken up by the courts as to whether you could actually rescind a vote on a constitutional amendment. And so that is addressed in this lawsuit. The Archivist of the United States, by the way, sent a letter to Representative Carolyn Maloney, you know, one of our long-term advocates and heroines of the Equal Rights Amendment in 2012, saying, no, there's no such thing as a rescission in ratifying constitutional amendments. Either you ratify or you don't even take it up. You cannot rescind. Article 5 of our Constitution, our federal Constitution, does not address rescissions at all whatsoever. So those 5 states are hopefully out of luck, and that will be considered by the court. The 3 AGs in our lawsuit here further assert that the 1982 extended deadline is not binding, as it was in the preamble of the amendment, not in the text. And they in their motion, they further state that the ERA has satisfied the constitutional requirements to be added to the U.S. Constitution. The archivist has no discretionary duty, has non-discretionary duty under federal law to publish and certify the Equal Rights Amendment as valid. So it's very clear in putting the burden on the archivist to take action, and that is what we're hoping that the court agrees and directs the archivist to do. The 5 states also, 3 of them originally brought a lawsuit against the amendment. They were the states of Alabama, Louisiana, and South Dakota, and Nebraska and Tennessee later joined. They intervened in this lawsuit. And so our 3 attorneys and these 5 states have all submitted their briefs. We joined with other women's organizations in the ERA coalition and submitted our own brief, a wonderful brief, I might add, done by Winston and Strawn. And so the court has all of the documents it needs. There has been a motion for a summary judgment, and there will be, let's see, according to Linda Coberly, she says now that the motion to dismiss, it was a motion to dismiss, fully briefed, the archivist has moved to state consideration, etc. She believes that the court will proceed very quickly to resolve this issue soon. Will deny the motion for a stay, set all motions for a hearing and together at some point later this fall. And when she briefed us over the phone a few weeks ago, she said a ruling could be issued in a matter of a few months. That would put it possibly in November, possibly in December, I would say maybe January at the latest. If anybody wants to review any of these documents, it's a lot of reading. let me know. I can send out links. And, you know, we're all set to have a big celebration this fall. It's been a long slog, and we've all worked very hard. And so I'm hoping for the best, and I want to encourage everybody to think positive. It will really help. Thanks very
Well,
much.
Jan, thank you so much for that. A lot of great information in your talk. And when you talk about a celebration and thinking positively, I feel very excited and positive to introduce Lexi Abrams to tell us, after all these decades of slog, as you say, even thinking of Alice Paul, you know, going back almost 100 years now from when she first wrote the ERA, that we still have amazing young women like Lexi Abrams, like you both were when you were working really hard to get this thing going at the beginning, to have young women like Lexi who have taken up the cause as well, still see it as important. So I'm going to turn it over to Lexi. Before I do that though, Alice, I don't know if you're seeing the Q&A, but you're getting a lot of hellos and a lot of people who are really happy to see you in the Q&A bubble. So not a lot of questions, but a lot of comments that they're glad to see you. So just wanted to make sure you knew that. Lexi is the New Jersey lead or co-lead for Generation Ratify, which, as I mentioned, is a Gen Z organization. And so Lexi's going to talk to us about why the ERA is important to her and her fellow students, and you know, why they got this organization started. And you know, as I told her the other night, we're expecting the young people to save the world, whether it's the March for Our Lives kids down in Florida or you guys in Generation Ratify. So Lexi, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Linda. It's great to be here. So just to reiterate, my name is Lexi. I'm one of the co-leads for Generation Ratify New Jersey. So we're the New Jersey chapter of the national organization Generation Ratify. And like Linda said, we are a youth-led organization that strives to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment and to advance gender equity. So the national organization started about a year ago, and then Generation New Jersey was born this January 2020. So since then, we've held phone banks, letter writing parties. We formed partnerships with like-minded organizations like Now New Jersey, and we've participated in a national lobbying day with the rest of Generation Ratify in July. And most recently, we were able to have a town hall series with some congressional candidates. And so for me, being a part of Generation Ratify has been such a mind-opening experience. And I just want to share a little bit about why someone like me, a high school student, 17 years old, wants to get involved in fighting for the passage of the ERA. So 2 years ago, I took a women's studies class at my high school. And before this class, I was kind of always aware of gender inequality around me in the news. And this sounds really bad to say, but I kind of thought of it as normal. You know, when people say, oh, you run like a girl, or they say to a boy, like, be a man, man up. I knew that was problematic, but I didn't really think about why that was problematic or how that rhetoric is kind of emblematic of a larger societal problem. But after taking this women's studies class for a semester, I felt completely different. I learned about the gender wage gap, sexual assault on college campuses, how women are treated in countries with more strict religious policies like Saudi Arabia, and so many other topics that I'd like never been exposed to before. And I walked away from this class with a greater understanding of the world around me and also with the drive to do something about it. So I was already interested and involved in politics. I work with high school Democrats, and I also interned with Congressman Malinowski, and I have been doing that for a couple of years. So I knew that I had to focus specifically on fighting gender inequality, specifically because of taking this women's studies class. So the following year, I joined Generation Ratify. And basically I didn't know anything about the Equal Rights Amendment. I had learned about it very briefly in a history class. Maybe we touched on the fact that it was never passed, but nothing more than that, other than like a super brief history. So since getting involved with Generation Ratify, I've been able to talk to members from across the country. And I think we all have a very similar reason for getting involved in the organization at this point, and for fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment. I think the biggest reason for educating ourselves and getting more involved in politics was because of the 2016 election. When Obama was president, we were all very young, but we kind of knew enough about the world to know that we were safe, and we were protected. But after the election of President Trump, I think a lot of people, including myself, stopped feeling safe. And when we stopped feeling safe, we tried to look for ways to make us feel safer and to make us feel more protected. And for me and a lot of people that I've talked to, that means educating ourselves and looking for ways to make a difference. And that speaks to a lot of how how Generation Ratify, the national organization, was started. Rosie, who is our executive director, she was in the library reading bills in the Virginia Assembly, and she stumbled upon the bill to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. And then she worked with friends to build up the movement to what it is today. And I think, like Rosie, when everyone who I've talked to realized that these super basic rights weren't enshrined in the Constitution, we were all really scared and we were terrified, and we knew we had to do something about it. So everyone in Generation Ratify is committed to fighting for gender equity. With every event we create, every phone call we make in support of a pro-ERA candidate, every chance we get to lobby a representative, we're making a difference. And just a couple of weeks ago, Generation Ratify New Jersey hosted a town hall with Congressman Tom Malinowski. And our policy director and I had the privilege of talking to the congressman about many topics, including menstrual equity. And he didn't really know too much about menstrual equity, so we kind of explained it to him and told him about a menstrual equity bill that is currently in Congress that would address putting period products into public school restrooms. So on that Zoom call, we urged him to co-sponsor the bill and advocate for it in Congress. And this experience for me was so eye-opening because it was just two high school girls teaching a congressman about how having a period can interfere with learning for menstruators. And I think this really just goes to show the power of youth, and that we're not willing to back down. We're educating ourselves constantly, just like I did during and then after taking my women's studies class. And we know now, and I know now, that gender inequality isn't and should not be normalized. And amending the Constitution to include the ERA will be a huge step, but we all know it won't be the last. After the ERA, we'll tackle the next problem and the next, and then the one after that. And hopefully with our combined passion and determination, we can change how we perceive gender in society.
Wow.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lexi. And I know Congressman Malinowski well, and he has a daughter, so so I'm glad you were able to educate him maybe a little more than his daughter ever did. But he's a good guy, and I know he's on our side. So glad to hear that he spent that time with you and listened and hopefully learned. I would like to now open it up for questions. I don't see any. I do see Lexi, you're an inspiration. I wish we could clone you. So there you go. And again, more hugs for Alice and a couple for Jan too. So do we have any questions? If not, or if you do, please put them in the Q&A section. That just got bigger. So let me see. Another hi to Jan and Alice from Shirley Henderson. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and ask Jan, Alice, and Lexi if they have any questions for each other to get us started. If not, I can certainly throw some out. But do any three of you have questions for each other?
Well, I did have a question for Alice, but by George, I've forgotten it. I should have written it down.
Well, I'll ask you a question, Jan.
Okay.
Would the Hobby Lobby case have turned out differently if we had had the ERA, so that the religious right would not have trumped necessarily the right of women to contraception?
Well, I'm not an attorney, and boy, I'd never thought about it that way, but I should say that these religious or moral exemptions that were expanded on tremendously by Donald Trump really now are in a whole bunch of policy and program areas. They are a real problem. And I'm not sure that the ERA would address that. I think we would have to ask somebody to maybe spend some time doing some research and thinking about it, somebody who's a really good constitutional lawyer, if they would feel that would be one way to address the denial of contraceptives. I should add, that whole experience with Hobby Lobby was so disgusting, I used to use that word, because the Hobby Lobby people had for years been offering insurance, providing insurance to their employees, and they have a lot of stores all around the country that did cover contraception. And then they were recruited by the religious right to get onto this lawsuit. I mean, there is a huge legal advocacy network out there. There are like hundreds of firms all around the country working on these very regressive lawsuits with very regressive ends, and this was one of them. There were some 100 lawsuits, by the way, that were filed in this area where the Affordable Care Act required insurance policies to provide no copay cost contraceptive coverage, which was a wonderful advance for women. And millions of women were able to take care of it. We'd love to see it restored. So that's a good question. Thanks for asking me. I will put that down and see if I can find somebody to spend some time looking at that.
Well, thanks for sharing a little more background with that on that with us. We do have a question from Veronica. She's asking, what can we do now to push the ERA through? Alice? Alice, I think you might be on mute. Alice, can you unmute yourself? I don't know if I can unmute you, but can't. I know you have a good answer to this. Okay, I think there you go.
I think I got
So
it
what
now.
can we do? What can we do now to help push through the ERA?
Well, luckily, we have 2 senators in New Jersey that are with us, so we don't have to flip. But we really do have to flip the Senate. And you can go to the website that I mentioned, voteforequality.us, and you can make a donation to the campaign, because we're paying all these students to organize. And so it adds up. Plus we're buying lists that advertisers use when they can get pictures of students on a particular day. So we got one of the last days in March that students were still populating the campuses and have purchased lists that our students will be working with. That all costs money. So really, again, it comes down to money. If you have people in those targeted states, make sure they vote, make sure they get their friends to vote. If you know students, they can get involved in the campaign. We have state Facebook pages and Twitter pages that they can plug into virtually.
Jen or Lexi, do you have an answer for that?
Well, I just wanted to add.
What can we do now?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I've been following this fiasco with the Postal Service and am very, very concerned about what might happen, as are a lot of election supervisors. I think for those folks who want to spread the word about folks getting their ballots mailed in or delivered in person early would be a really, really important thing to do, and to kind of monitor what's happening in their states. Just recently, the post office, under this Postmaster General, who apparently has some serious conflicts of interest, mailed out a mailer that had a lot of misinformation to all states. And Colorado, which is my home state, sued and stopped the delivery of that misinformation to voters in Colorado. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong here, and it really takes a very observant and active population to try to make sure that any additional voter suppression things don't take place in their communities. It's just really critical. And and what you could do is call your election supervisor to report anything you're concerned about.
You also can sign up to be a poll worker.
Right.
There's a desperate need for poll workers, both with the pandemic and the fact that people who work the polls have been working them for years, and they're really getting to the point where they don't feel they can do it anymore. So
Right.
it's very important role, and it's needed in New Jersey as it is in every other state. So that's something else to look into do for election day.
So Lexi, where do you think this renewed momentum around the ERA came from? You mentioned a women's studies class that educated you, but clearly it's a whole organization. Where did it come from? And you know, what can other folks do to help your organization get this passed?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, and like again from like talking to people I've met throughout the country who are involved in Generation Ratify, I really think that like just educating ourselves and taking more of a deeper look into stuff is like the biggest way that we got super involved. So I never learned about the ERA except for maybe like 2 seconds of it in school. So when I learned about it in my women's studies class, I like went onto the internet and like did so much more research. And I think that's the way that a lot of people were able to learn more about it. So I think when Generation Ratify got started, it was just about like bringing people in and kind of educating them, and then bring them to that point where they're able to go forth and like lobby representatives, lobby senators, or do things like this, like webinars and stuff to educate more people. So I think that with that, all that momentum and passion and knowledge, we were able to kind of all come together. And specifically, Generation Ratify, the national organization, was started in Virginia in last July. So they had time to kind of organize and educate themselves and kind of get all the talking points that they needed. And then they were able to go out there and lobby their representatives and their assembly people to get it passed in Virginia.
Jan, what will someone asking you specifically, what will the ERA not fix?
Oh my gosh. You know, there's a lot of
We can give
debate.
that question to Alice if you'd like.
Alice, do you have any ideas? I mean, it can't solve,
Well,
it cannot solve all of our problems. That's for darn sure. Alice, do you have any thoughts?
I think the biggest issue is reproductive rights. And basically, that has been discussed back and forth and argued. The feminist majority's position is that at this point, we do not say that it covers it, but history will tell in the future what the interpretations will be after it's certified.
Certainly, if we flip the Senate and take
Yeah.
the White House, that's going to be positive that could be positive for reproductive rights, as well as the ERA.
That's right.
Right. I might add, Linda, our former president, Terry O'Neill, was convinced that the ERA could be very effective in trying to reduce domestic violence and sexual assault. And I know others have said that. I just am waiting to see what the particular approaches would be that would advance an equal treatment, equal protection under the ERA for survivors of domestic violence. It may be that folks that focus exclusively in the area of domestic violence have some thoughts on this, and we should maybe talk with them and see if we can get that better clarified. I
Very
myself,
interesting.
yeah, really
That's
would
very
like to learn more. Mhm.
I mean, one of the things it won't fix is something that Lexi brought up, which is that just our language. And I tell people language matters, right? Run like a girl and or throw like a girl and man up and all those kinds of phrases. I'll just tell a little personal anecdote about that. So 10 years ago, when I started the business that I currently run at our bank, I was working with a bunch of IT guys, literally guys, and they would always call the effort around a particular task man hours. And at one point I looked at and I looked at the guy across the table and I said, "Are there only men working on this project?" And he said, "No." I said, "Okay, well then we can call them work hours, right?"
Yeah.
But it's little, you don't even realize where all the phraseology that is sexist is in our culture until you really start to listen very, very carefully. So it certainly won't fix that, but as it fixes other things, then hopefully those more societal driven things like language will follow. Let's see what else we got. We got a comment about the census, important to maintaining our representation. Do any of the three of you have any thoughts on that?
Well, you know, if they don't, there is a lawsuit pending.
We have a comment that says, "I never understand when we are called guys. I always say I'm not a guy."
In
I
answering
think I've got a little bit of a lag.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Jan.
Well, there is a lawsuit pending about the census. You know, the president wants to cut it off after September 30th. And the census folks say that they will not be able to do the kind of expanded outreach to be able to count folks who are harder to, you know, harder to get a hold of. They may not have phones. They may, at any rate, there are a lot of folks who tend to be maybe from the lower income earner categories that need to be, and also, you know, undocumented immigrants who may not have gotten the word that they can be counted. There will not be any disclosure of their citizenship status, but it is all persons in the United States who are supposed to be counted. So hopefully that lawsuit will be successful so that the census people can continue doing their work further into the year and we can have a good census, because we have to be able to have faith that everybody, as much as possible, has been counted.
And
So
the
here's another question. Go ahead, Alice.
The census is so important because those numbers are used to determine all kinds of social services that are provided to the population.
Yeah.
And most important, it's what is used to figure for redistricting of the state legislatures and Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's critical that every person is counted.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the last question, because we are reaching 8 o'clock, and although the panelists did agree to go a little longer, we won't drag it out too long, although this has been great fun. If we flip the Senate, do you think that will be enough, or will we still end up in court?
We could. But I don't think so. You know,
You think that's going to be enough?
Actually, there was a rumor that came from a very highly placed source in the U.S. House, and I'm not going to disclose who said it, that she was confident that the Senate, in the final analysis, even this Senate, would vote to remove the deadline. So I have my fingers crossed, and maybe that will happen. But it may be after this court decision. And of course, the fact that 94% of the population supports an equal rights amendment, the conservatives will give up and just let it go. I hope.
I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. I think that it will eventually end up in the Supreme Court.
So Lexi, is your group in it for the long haul in case it does take a little longer than just flipping the Senate?
Yes, I think we're ready to go. And I saw in an article somewhere that Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that she thinks it's going to go to the courts. So that made me really nervous because it's like RBG is saying that. So that doesn't look too good. But yeah, if we have to take it to the courts, I think we're ready and we're going to keep fighting.
Excellent.
Well, I have to add, I was very unhappy with Ruth Bader Ginsburg with that we needed to start all over. I thought, good grief, give us a break.
Well,
no more. We got to go for it now.
Well, Lexi, we're so glad that you're aboard.
Thank you.
And we look forward to working with you.
Yeah, and you guys are such amazing.
Hopefully we can disabuse her of that notion. The feminist majority. Thank you all so much. I do want to do a quick thank you to our sponsors. If we could stick that slide up there. I want to thank our social justice sustainer, State Senator Nicholas Scutari, our Equal Rights Emerald sponsor, the Hudson County Democratic Organization with Chairwoman Amy DeGuys, who is a millennial. So we love seeing that. And then the pro-choice platinum sponsors, the Essex County Democratic Committee, and it's Chairman Leroy Jones, Assembly Member Thomas Giblin, Millennials for New Jersey, great organization, Senator Troy Singleton, who will be speaking on one of our panels later this month, and Senator Loretta Weinberg, who really is a wonderful woman, and we'll be hearing from her, I believe, on October 3rd during our main event. I also want to mention to the audience, we have 5 more of these webinars. Title IX Under Assault is the next one this Thursday at 7 p.m. You can register for it on the site and nownj.org/2020-state-conference. We have more than just pronouns, which is going to be a great session on Monday, September 21st about navigating the intersection between gender identity all at 7 p.m. And then finally, Free the Flow and the Stigma, which has to do about menstrual equity, which we touched on tonight on Tuesday, September 29th. And then the 6th one is Build a Feminist Economy, which is fascinating topic coming out of as we think about what we want to be as a society coming out of the pandemic. And that's on Thursday, October 1st. So we thank all of our generous sponsors for their support of the National Organization for Women of New Jersey. Thank you again, panelists, Lexi, Jan, and Alice. It was really an honor for me, and clearly from the comments, an honor for our audience as well, to meet and hear from all of you. Thank you, audience, for sticking with us and listening, and for the great questions. And please join us for the rest of the seminars. Votes, Right, Equality, Nothing Less, our 2020 state conference. Good night, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. It was great to see you all.
Says we're still recording.
You should tell people that it is going to be recorded and they